We'll be back next Tuesday. So don't miss out. Have the down form already.
Please take out your homework. Here comes Senator Gary to stamp it. And in the main hall very much. On the meeting with 5 persons, and we already have 15 people signed up. So it should be a pretty awesome thing. Be sure to come out and I'll fight for that trophy. Next up, Winter Formals is fast approaching. It's this February 28th. And don't forget, Winter Formal guest passes for your friends who doesn't go to school are available on the wall in the AP office. So stop by and take one out. This Saturday, the Future Leaders of America 9th grade youth advocacy university conference is taking place at UCSC from 8:30 to 3:30. Workshops, speakers, and engaging activities from students who are more involved in positive change in their community will all be presented. Alright, finally. Senior Santa Barbara High School Choral Department is putting on their food festival this Saturday, 9 to 2, and a lot of stuff going on Saturday. So from 9 to 2, came the quad. This food festival will benefit the choral department, and we have businesses such as El Sitio, El Zarape, Trudeau's, and Rosales Mexican Restaurant all going to be there selling food in the U.S. So be sure to come out. We've got a lot going on today, Friday, and Saturday. I'll see you guys there. What?
One of the seasons of time. Right.
Yeah. Right. Where do you get your yeah.
I those primarily in spring. Yeah. Well, I do. I just said it to you.
Marina, do you have my World Without Us book? I don't believe you.
Do you not have it?
Right.
I never read it, so I just gave it back to you. But I remember bringing it back, but
I remember Girls Live. There's that.
that's a lot. I never realized.
What?
What?
What's the license of this job?
Feign ignorance, that's the other one.
Oh, it's.
You would think really fast in the frosty part.
Where's my little cedar?
I'm growing into a tree.
Get it, little cedar? Anybody know what's up with that dude? He's in Colorado? Oh, visiting his sister, right.
You know, they need those for like, fire hoses. That'd be cool.
All right.
It's like some. Like this to destroy everything. Otherwise.
While Samuel stamps your homeworks,
how do they avoid fish from getting into that?
I'm not sure that they do.
Oh,
I don't really think fish are going to jam up the gears or anything. That's pretty high pressure, so I think it just kind of makes a
They
little
hit
bit
the
of
sweet
space.
spot and everything is ruined.
All right. There's a Green Club event tonight from 6 to 8 where you get 2 points for sitting in a city council meeting about desalination. Remember that you have to RSVP, and remember that you cannot be late. My Green Club will basically ignore you. Like if you walk in and they've started talking, go home. Like if you open the door and they're already talking, leave. My Green Club will not give you a handout. You will not be counted. If you want to get the points, just get there a few minutes early so that we don't interrupt the city council meeting with a bunch of high school kids all showing up late, because that would be really tacky and it would not be cool for me. Mackenzie Fell, are you going today?
Yeah.
Are you on campus between 3 and 3:15, 3:30ish?
Day.
Yes, this day.
I went to class.
Is anybody else here for sure going? Are any of you here between 3 and 3:15-30ish?
Yeah, we get up at 3.
3:05ish? Because I want to go at lunch to make the handouts for the event. And then I want to make photocopies and put them in an envelope and give them in a sealed envelope to somebody to take to Grace Silver at the event.
What you can't do it at lunch.
I could try at lunch.
I was from you in like 5th period. I can get them at like 3 if you sit there.
How about we have 2 separate opportunities for you? Opportunity number 1, Mackenzie Fell, can you please text me before period 5 starts to see if I succeeded in making the copies in that window?
Yeah.
And then, can you, Gabiak, please text me at the end of period 6 just to see if Mackenzie got them, or if I need you to meet me somewhere so I can give you the... I'm hoping Fell can handle it. I'm hoping Fell can handle it so you don't have to. And so you would just take the envelope to the right person and then you're good. When you show up, look for Grace Silver or look for the little signs that say Seats Reserved, Santa Barbara High School Green Club. Yeah. Oh, and if you attend today, I would encourage you to have all the political opinion that you like and make all the political speech that you like, but be careful when people talk on your behalf. Other people might say, you know, we've got all these kids here who blah, 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 and you should be like, no, don't talk for me. You know, it's a political thing. Like, you all have your own, like, political opinions. That's great. Don't let other people co-opt your presence. Okay. Would anybody else like to discuss that Green Club event today? Okie doke. Remember that the College Board accommodation deadline is this Friday. That's also when your medical release is due for the field trip. That's also when your dissolved oxygen lab prep is due. Friday. The dissolved oxygen lab prep, that's 2 days away, because today's Wednesday already. Hump day, and we're here. So dissolved oxygen lab prep, medical release form, College Board accommodation deadline. Yeah?
The lab prep is just the same we've done in the past, right?
Yeah, there's materials in both of the procedures. Both of the procedures. The materials in both of the procedures. Now that everybody got that. Did we build a dam last week? How to build a dam? Did we do the how to build a dam part?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Like this stuff? And did we talk about the problems that dams make? Number 22? Yes? Started but didn't finish? Please take out your number 22 notes. Today we'll do 23 and 24 as well. Paul, who sits behind you? Between Luke and Jay Cranmer. If we talk about these ecological changes, and you have this part already annotated in your notes, raise your hand. Looks good enough. What about the human issues? Did we talk about the impacts to humans in society? Great. You may want to write these down because I'm going to say stuff about them. Does everybody already have these on their paper, but I haven't said anything about them? You have them on your paper already? Okay. When we talk about loss of land, there's a very important detail. Humans always like to live near water. Watch me. Banks of the river, the river. When you make that into a reservoir, please look up. The river climbs to fill the canyon, and people are always living next to rivers. Like if you want to find archaeological sites, you look next to rivers. Like in the history of humanity, there's one place you always find humans, next to rivers. So anytime that you're going to flood, uphill, see where that reservoir has expanded the size of the river? People lose their land. And yeah, in the United States, we usually pay you for it. But if your grandma's buried, that's not worth a lot. And in many parts of the world, we don't even pay you. In many parts of the world, it's just like, hey, you got to move because we're going to flood your neighborhood. There's this little country called China. And they have this little building project called the Three Gorges Dam. You may have heard of? And China disputes this, but a number of human rights organizations claim that people who lived next to the river that was going to be flooded by the reservoir, people along the river were given a wheelbarrow, a pry bar, and a sledgehammer, and told if they wanted to keep their house, they had to take it apart and rebuild it up the hill. And there was like this giant nonprofit photo project of all these old folks walking piles of wheelbarrow up these switchback trails to rebuild their neighborhood on the cliff banks. Remember that here in the U.S., yes, we pay you, but the loss of land is something. Number two, because people have always been along rivers, there's a lot of archaeological sites lost. That dam, right there, that one, back there in the distant horizon, right up at the upper edge of my whiteboard, or of the computer screen, sorry, at the top of the screen, in that reservoir right at the back, more than 5,000 archaeological sites are under Lake Powell. Here's a fun fact for you. Because Lake Powell flooded so many archaeological sites, the United States was the first country to have a significant volume of trained underwater archaeologists. like scuba tank archaeologists. And so now that it's like a discipline in many American universities to do underwater archaeology, we train divers to do archaeological work, and you can get work all over the world working on like other drowned archaeological sites. Because we got so good at it, because we have so many in Lake Powell. Fun fact. Then there's the really big problem. And we're going to come back to this one. We're going to come back to this one. For humans, dams suck. Because they're a lot of money, they don't last very long, and they're really, really, really expensive to get rid of. Like extremely crazy expensive. Okay, quickly. Downhill. Does everybody remember what happened to New Orleans? The reason that it's sinking? Why is New Orleans sinking? Yeah. Kinda. They took away the sandbars, that's why it's flooding so much, that's why the storm hits it so hard. But why is it subsiding? You might know Venice, Italy. Why is Venice, Italy sinking into the ground?
Aren't they like both below sea level?
Kinda. They're right at sea level. Yeah. What James Mell just said. Watch. Remember this. There's water moving underground, groundwater. And as that water moves, it moves very slowly, but it carries away little bits of sediment out to the ocean. And over time, your city's just running out of dirt. It's being swept out from underneath the city, right? Naturally, rivers deliver more sediment. But when dams block that sediment flow, please look up. The sediment blockage accelerates subsidence of land along the coast. It sinks faster now that there's no more sediment supply. Yeah?
So why is that only happening in like New Orleans and Venice? Or is it happening everywhere? It's just
It probably happens in a lot of other places too. So in many rivers where you don't have a city there, you just lost wetland habitat because the delta doesn't have sandbars anymore. In a lot of the like Northern California and Oregon, Washington rivers, you don't necessarily have rivers built on those sandbars. But now that we've dammed those rivers so much, in those river mouths, they've kind of lost the sandy bottom, and they're just getting to be these rocky gutters that go out to the ocean, and so that's affected fisheries there. Of course, that sediment supply is really important for that's just agricultural, in case anybody was curious. For agricultural renewal. Has anybody heard of the Tigris-Euphrates river basin, or the Fertile Crescent? The reason that the Fertile Crescent was so fertile is because the river would flood and bring new sediment. Remember that the river just brings you organic material, and so it's like a hit of fertilizer every year. You just get like some fresh compost. But when you block that sediment upriver, you get less agricultural renewal. For many farmers in the United States, that's not a problem, but people who farm on riverbanks need those floods. That's why we farm on riverbanks. Dams, of course, mess up your fisheries. Do you all understand that not all rivers have salmon? Does everybody understand that not all rivers have salmon? But when we dam salmon rivers, that affects the fishery for salmon because they can't go up to breed. Is that a concept everybody understands, that salmon go up the river to the little tiny creeks up high elevation and make their babies, and then they die? And then the babies go out to the ocean and make big salmon to come back up? Everybody know about that, salmon? We're all clear on how salmon works? And when you put big dams on the river, they can't migrate, and so they don't go breed, and so you don't get any more seafood. Finally, international relationships are a really big whoop. Did we talk about why we want dams? Why we would bother? That says bother, not puther. Yeah. Okay. So now I can catch up with my first period class, because there is something very important I'd like you to highlight in your notes. Look at the red. Look at the red. There's one issue on this whiteboard that's probably much more important than any other. It's the sediment issue. The fundamental crux of dams in the future is the sediment issue. There's this thing that I keep saying throughout the course of the year that by now you've all heard a few times. Fast-moving water is really powerful. It can move buildings and school buses and boulders and even your mom. But when water slows down, the house settles, the school bus settles, the boulder settles, your mama settles, and eventually, if you totally stop the water, even the silty sediment will settle. You know when you see perfectly clear water that it's perfectly still. Right? Now remember, rivers are moving water, so by their very nature, because the water's moving, there must be sediment flowing. It's just a thing that rivers do. They transport big rocks at the top and make the sand that is the beaches and the bottom of the ocean. That's where the bottom of the ocean comes from. All that sand down there, it's from rivers that break up rocks. Everybody understand that? Sand is little pieces of rock. Are we all on the same page? So please look up. Dams stop the river flow, and so they trap sediment. What that means is, because that sediment has stopped, there's less sediment downhill, and thus the fish can't hide because the water's too clear. There's no more muddy bottom for all the species that live in a muddy bottom. There's no more riparian habitat because the banks don't have their supply of sediment. The water gets too cold because it's too clear, and so the sunlight doesn't heat up the sediment in the water. That makes dams short-lived and very expensive to remove. That accelerates subsidence at the coast, and that prevents agricultural renewal. That's all the sediment problem. There are a couple of facts you should probably know. They're kind of famous ones. Glen and Boulder dams, they receive about 2 dump trucks of sediment per second. Think about that. 2 dump trucks per second. So 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000, 5 1,000. That's a lot of sediment. Look at where those dams are. I don't know if it makes sense, but does everybody realize that like that one and that one, those are like pretty sandy parts of the world, right? Like anywhere that snowmelt hits sandstone, it's making sand, right? And whenever it rains, it's washing across like the desert. I wonder if there's any sand in that. So, in these desert areas where we really want reservoirs, because you know it's dry, so we really need the water. In these desert areas, where those dams are so critical, they are by their very fundamental need and location, filling up with sediment. Both of those, Glen and Boulder, please look up. They are now, today, about halfway full with sediment. And every second, we're adding the equivalent of 2 dump trucks. It's 10 million tons per year, by the way. It's a lot of sediment. Does anybody see a problem coming by adding that much sediment? It's about 50, 60 years away, this problem.
Well, it won't have it carry any water anymore.
Yeah, they'll fill up with sediment and they won't really carry any water anymore. Anybody know what happens right after that? The dam breaks, yeah. The water goes over the top and it causes erosion, and then the thing starts to crumble, and then you get this like giant tidal wave of mud. So here's a few things that I, like, you're all going to think that I'm exaggerating or something, and then I challenge you to prove me wrong, because this is like a big wake-up moment for you as a person aware of life in this world at your age. Each dam is a ticking time bomb, and we cannot defuse it. Each dam is filling up with sediment. When they're full of sediment, they stop working, they're worthless, and then it's just a matter of time before they break. The first big flood, water goes over the top, break, giant tidal wave of death.
Sure it happens that quickly?
No, I don't know how quickly it happens. But we know that they fill up with sediment. That's just a thing that dams do, because they stop water. And if you walk along any creek in Santa Barbara, you'll see where there's like an obstruction, there's a bunch of sand on the backside, on the uphill side. Because when you slow down the water, the sediment, and then that's just the thing that dams do. So now please look up. If you flush out the sediment, like you open all the valves at once and let some sediment leave with the water, all of this is reversible. There's an article in your reading packet about how on the Colorado River they tried that. In the flood season, they've opened up all the gates on a couple of these dams, and you know what? The fish do better, the bugs make more babies, the plants all grow, the water gets colder, and the ecosystem comes right back. Here's the good news. It is possible for the dam to dump some sediment. Yeah?
You said the water gets colder?
Sorry, I meant to say warmer too. Because the sediment is basically stone, so it has a lot of thermal mass and it's darker, so it heats up the water.
Wait, so why is it cold in the first place? If there's dams?
So
Because
dams, there's two reasons for the cooling. One of them is the depth of the water. So because the water's so far from the warm at the surface, it's still and it's surrounded by cold rock. So the water that comes out of reservoirs is inherently cold. But second of all, because it's clear, it's also colder. Warmer water traps more radiation and heats up better. It's like dark sweater, white sweater thing. So the sediment solves at least the sweater thing, not the depth issue. Good news is you can dump some sediment. Here comes the bad news. There's no way to empty all the sediment out of those reservoirs. This is one of those problems that the past has made to give to you. Merry Christmas. Welcome to America. Here is your glory land. And by the way, the dams are going to blow up soon. There doesn't appear to be any rational plan to get rid of all that sediment. I mean, I challenge you to think about the real logistics. How can you deliver 4 dump trucks of sediment per second, which would give you no more sediment in 70 years? 2 per second to keep up with the supply, plus 2 per second to get rid of what's already stored up. Let's just do 2 per second. Like, think about what has to happen to have, watch me, 2 dump trucks per second. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000. Like, how many dump trucks is that? How would you fill that many dump trucks with sediment? Where would they drive it? Who would drive them 24/7 forever? That's just to block the incoming sediment at each of the big dams. You understand what I mean about this just being a logistical impossibility? The water's very efficient. It's aided by gravity. We're talking about a lot of watershed. They're big lumps of real estate. That's a lot of sediment. I sense a lot of sleepiness in the room. I'm not going to blame anybody for that. But I hope you notice that this is a really big, critical issue, that sediment challenge. I'm not exaggerating, this isn't like theatrics, like seriously, that this is a big, giant question mark that nobody apparently has answered. Yeah, but
If you take the dams away, won't the river just slowly redistribute all of that built up sediment by itself just over like a long period of time?
that's kind of like saying after you detonate the bombs, won't everything grow back? But, well, yeah, but, you know, I'm not worried about that stage in the, yeah. So, after the giant, suffocating, destructive tidal wave of death, over time,
Or it sounds like that's going to happen no matter what.
well, you know, if you lived in Vegas, you might be a little more worried than you sound. Yeah. Yeah. You know, in a long time frame, nothing matters. You know, we're all going to get sucked into the sun, so whatever. But I think, you know, like there's a magnitude at which these problems are actually really scary, and that's if you live downhill of these dams, and there's really no convenient way to decommission them. You know, given all of these problems, the fact that they don't last very long, and that today building something that big has gotten so expensive, and taking it apart is even more expensive, nobody's doing this anymore. Well, except for one place, and we'll come back to it. Anybody know when rivers flow? When's high flow? High flow is spring. Sometimes winter, usually spring. Anybody know when they are dry? When the waters run out. The fall. You need this for the warm-up, and you need this for your conversation of dams.
So the spring and fall.
Pretty much. It kind of depends on your elevation. Most rivers flow when the snow is melting. Snow starts melting as the days get longer. So most rivers tend to flow in the spring. They tend to dry up in the fall. I want to remind you, there's a little adjustment depending on where the headwaters are. Who knows what headwaters is? Headwaters? Yes? Yeah, the water at the top of a river, top of the head. Please look up. That is the Amazon basin, that huge green pocket. It's really nice there. And the Amazon River, which cuts through right there. Do you guys know that the Amazon River used to go out to the Pacific Ocean? And then the Andes mountain range blocked it to make a gigantic lake that cracked through the Guyana high plains? That's neat, right? For a while, this was one giant lake. By while, I mean like hundreds of thousands of years, I think. Okay, anyway. As the Andes rose, the river found a new exit. Today, that sediment makes an alluvial fan that goes halfway to Africa. Everybody knows, by the way, that that used to fit that, right? Okay. So now, when does the Amazon water flow the most? During the rainy season? It is a trick question, because the Amazon River does not have the highest flow rate in the rainy season.
Because it takes so long for the water to get from one end to the other.
And especially because even when it's raining in the river basin itself, the majority of the flow of the Amazon comes from the melting at the top. All of these headwaters dump in to the Amazon River. So I want to remind you that if your river has snowy headwaters, the biggest flow is at peak snowmelt. If the headwaters are not in the snow, the biggest flow is at peak rainfall. You all know that, like, when Rattlesnake Creek starts flowing, it must be raining, because 2 days later it's going to be bone dry again, right? These are like gutters in a dry landscape with no snow at the top. The peak flow on the headwaters of the Tuolumne River are right around June, July. Because that's how long it takes for the snow to really pick up melting. Okay? So a little elevation adjustment, but usually the spring. If you're low and you're just catching rainwater, then it's just when it's raining. Now, when do the dams release the most water? Like, what do you need the water for? Electricity and? Drinking / irrigation, agricultural irrigation. So if we need it for electricity, household use, and agricultural irrigation, when do we release the most water? When do you need the most electricity, for example, in the desert?
It's hot.
In the summer, to run the air conditioning. And when do you need the most agricultural irrigation? Summer, right? So when do you think the Colorado River has the highest flow rate now? Summer. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Especially at the end of summer, when everybody's trying to like nail all the different phases of the agricultural cycle. It kind of peaks at the end of summer, which you might remember is when the river used to be the lowest, like summer getting into fall. So dams are built precisely to prevent what a river does. The whole point of a dam is to not let the river do its thing. That's what dams are for. When it's spring, nobody needs the air conditioning. There's very little irrigation going on if the rainy season just ended. Spring in the desert usually still has a few sprinkles and stuff. So this is the funny part. Dams reverse the natural cycle of a river. That's this one right here. Number 6, the reverse seasons. Okay. Anybody want to talk more about dams? Are we all done? So now, if you have any dam questions, I'd like to be your dam tour guide. Because there is one place where the mega dam building is still going on. This is an important distinction for you. The developed world is not building dams anymore. Major European power nations, the United States, as far as I know, Canada, modern developed economies, they're not doing the dam thing. That's played out. We got better ideas now. Dams ruin the river, they mess up the water quality, they don't really give you that much, they're a very expensive way to provide water. Nobody's really hot on dams anymore, except, the most developed nations. Except there's this one little country called China, you may have heard of. And they have this one little building project called the Three Gorges Dam, you may have heard of. And here comes the funny story about the Three Gorges Dam. I don't know how many of these numbers you have to know, but back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, China's economy was blowing up. How many of you are aware of that fact? They said, "Hey, World Bank, I know our economy looks pretty good. How about you help us make more electricity and stop floods and irrigate more reliably? Because we'd like to grow some investments." And the World Bank goes, "Ooh, that sounds really good. Of course I want to be a part of that action." So China says, "Look, we got this idea. It's 1992. And we'd like to provide 10% of China's electricity with a single project. We are ambitious. We're a growing superpower. We will show the world how amazing we are." Any way you measure it, the Three Gorges Dam is the largest thing ever built. Any way you measure it. Look at this. It's the most steel ever used in one place. The most concrete ever used in one place. The most expensive thing ever built. The most voluminous thing ever built. The most workers employed on a single project.
Great Wall of China.
The Great Wall of China was not a single project. There is no single Great Wall of China. The Great Walls of China were built by numerous dynasties over 700 or 800 years as an interconnected and often overlapping set of barriers that are not contiguous, contrary to popular belief. National Geographic did a great story about the Great Wall of China. Great Walls of China. The dam is 1.3 miles long, 61 stories tall. The reservoir at the longest point is more than 410 miles. That makes it much larger than Lake Superior. It's the world's largest reservoir, the world's largest source of electricity. They had to make 2 separate mines nearby just to provide the concrete material. They built an extensive network of railroad tracks just to move material into that one spot. And when China was doing this, the World Bank was like, "Yeah, all right, let's go for it. We'll give you some money." And the price tag was assumed to be somewhere between $5 and $10 billion. When the price tag climbed to 15, the World Bank said, "You know, this is starting to look kind of shady." And when a bunch of geologists said, "Wait, we can't build something this big," and people started to worry about the seismic issues and the earthquakes, the World Bank pulled out, and China said, "Screw you, we're still going for it," and they went for it. And $24 billion later, it's almost done. It takes almost a day to drive all the way around. It blocks 3 whole rivers where they meet, like an Adidas logo, thus the Three Gorges. That area has a bunch of people living there, and China refutes these claims, but human rights groups have footage and interviews of villagers literally moving their houses up to the rim to avoid the floods. But anybody know what happens when you start to flood a canyon that has stuff on the edges? What happens? It starts to fall in. They cause their own mudslides. And those areas had a lot of people who'd been living there for a very, very long time. So there's like factories and landfills and like cemeteries. So my favorite thing about the entire project is China came up with a very interesting solution to all the waste in the reservoir. They built these floating docks that have conveyor belts called tongues. and they move along tracks. And as they move, they slurp up floating debris, which apparently includes carcasses and whatnot. And all that stuff goes up the conveyor belt to those tracks, where it goes off both ends to 2 landfills that manage all of the waste that is migrating down the reservoir to the dam. Fun fact, China's electricity demand has grown, so today it can only provide about 3% of China's electricity. Fun fact, it's almost full. Hasn't broken yet. But here comes my favorite bit of news. You see, tectonic plates move, right? But some of you may know that water's pretty heavy, right? This is the largest reservoir that's ever been built. We already know that this happens with smaller reservoirs. But anybody know what happens when you take a moving plate and you put something really heavy on top? Yeah. So there have already been reports that the Three Gorges Reservoir is causing small earthquakes because they're sort of increasing the drag of that tectonic plate. They're kind of pinning it in place. And remember I told you that one of the big selling points was they would prevent flooding downhill? The Yangtze River was historically one of the deadliest flooding rivers because there's so many cities built up on the banks. And as soon as the dam started to slow the flow of water, people have rushed to build along the banks of the Yangtze as if that dam could never break. I have a really, really, really bad feeling. Like someday I worry that you'll be like in college, or you'll be home with your kids, or you'll be going to work. And there'll be like a report on the news about how the Three Gorges Dam broke, and I hope I didn't tell you so. But I feel really scared about that one. Alright. By the way, I don't want to sound like I'm biased against China, but does everybody know that the Chinese government is kind of stubborn and is known for like propaganda control and like not discussing mistakes and like not apologizing and stuff like that? A lot of environmentalists argue that they're like riding their bike off the pier, and everybody's like, you know, that's not going to go well, and they're like, everything's cool. All right. The last one that we need to discuss today is number 24, which is a 3-star study goal about channelization. Is 3 stars. I put some notes on the board, but I want to talk about this stuff. Remember, these are my notes. Your notes would probably have more details if you wanted to get good grades. I'd like everybody to please think back to what you've seen in pictures and old movies about the construction of early American cities, like early 1900s. Like when the earthquake struck San Francisco, or the fire, whatever. Maybe think about like the footage in Godfather 2 of like Staten Island. Remember some things about construction in the early 1900s. Just imagine for a minute. Dirt roads, simple wooden construction or brick construction. We did not have concrete foundations for our homes. And imagine in that setting what a hassle rain would be. You know what happens on dirt roads when they get rainy, right? Back in the day when like you had like horse-drawn buggies and like the first cars didn't have four-wheel drive and stuff. Everybody knows what I'm saying, right? So the rain on the roads, major hassle. You know what rain does to houses that don't have modern construction and don't have modern foundations? Like when water goes downhill to a house that doesn't have a concrete foundation, you all know what happens, right? They like sink in and they break. So humanity solved a problem. Early in the 1900s, all of our design for cities was about getting rid of the water. Water's bad, understandably. Dangerous for driving, dangerous for homes. You know, mosquitoes and stuff. Water's a problem. So look, everybody sees that elevator with like the single pitch roofs that have like rain gutters and downspouts. And how if you look out here, that concrete's not perfectly flat. It's actually very carefully angled so that water will flow into gutters. And all of those gutters flow together to drainage canals that all go out to the ocean. This is modern construction. We solved the problem. All we had to do was turn rivers into this. We got to be really, really clear. Canals and channels were a good solution to a real problem at the time. Getting the water away from where the humans are. It just so happens that there was no water shortages because populations were low. And if you ask an average homeowner, hey, what do you think about water? They're like, it's just the most horrific thing in my day-to-day life. Please keep it away from me. I mean, think about it. Like, every time it rained, people's like woolen cotton clothing would get, unbearably uncomfortable. Their house would start to leak. The mold would take over. The mosquitoes would move in. The cars would crash. The buggies would get stuck. Rain was not a nice thing that we could deal with socially. So we dumped it. Now, we're dealing with the consequences of that problem. This is figure 2116. And I'd like you to look at it later if you don't already have it copied from your notes. But let's compare these natural flows to that channelized stream at the top. Keep in mind, this might be worth writing down. You clear vegetation. You straighten the flow line. You make the canal wider, deeper, and smoother. You know, to make it into a gutter so the water will flush away. That's not a bad solution to the problems we discussed earlier. But now compare. Rivers have a diversity of habitats. How many of you have actually been in a river? So you've seen like the cobbly section, the deep pools behind the rocks, how where it sticks out, and there'll be like shady banks in some places, and there's like a cliff you can jump off because there's like deep pools. You all understand those diversity of habitats. There's the sandy areas and the gravelly and the cobbly and the chunky rock. Well, that's a lot of ecological benefit. There's habitat diversity, there's riparian vegetation on the edges, all those plants that grow over and provide that heavenly dappled shade where it's a great place to chill and take a nap. Because of the deep spots and the organic material, rivers tend to have very consistent temperatures. From the hottest to the coldest part of the day, river temperatures don't change very much. And because rivers have what's called riffle, where like the surface gets broken up, you know how it gets like kind of whitewashed, where it's like chunky over rocks, shallow water? I'm talking about riffles are. That dissolves a lot of oxygen. Please look up. Diversity of habitat, riparian vegetation, consistent temperatures, and high dissolved oxygen. Compare that to a canal. There's no habitat diversity. It's just a gutter. No habitats, let alone diversity of habitats. There's no riparian vegetation because, it's just concrete. There are extreme temperature spikes because at night you just have a little thin sheet of cold water, and at day you just have a little thin sheet of super hot sunny water. And there's no dissolved oxygen because there's a consistent flat surface that never changes elevation, so it gets stagnant. You understand this distinction, right? Next, these ecosystems are complex. With all of that difference in habitat, these are really complex ecosystems. You've got all the decomposers, all the bugs, all the amphibians, all the fish, all the birds, the mammals come to hunt, but none of that in canals. And this is not a real word. That's not a real word. But it is possible to migrate in regular rivers and streams, not in canals. These are called barriers to wildlife. We humans, we like our rivers and streams. They bioremedy pollution because of all of those decomposers and bugs. They clean up our pollution. They recharge our groundwater, and they're like beautiful, fun places to be. Compared to canals, which just flood pollution, make river downhill, and offer us no real recreational or aesthetic value. Tomorrow, if you didn't finish these notes, you'll need to finish them by then, and I'll ask you to bring a picture of that sheet of notes, this thing. You have to photograph those notes for our field trip next Monday, because I promise I will show you every single one of these issues on our field trip next Monday. Yeah?
Okay, so you said that you make rivers deeper when you make them in channels, but then you said they were shallower.
So they're deeper to handle a larger volume of water during floodwaters, but the water volume in these, because they're a consistent flat bottom, is a thin sheet of water. It's a little paradox that rivers, because they get wide, often can't handle good flow. But rivers also have pockets. The diversity of habitats is what makes the deep spots. And that has thermal mass because the water is in a big glob. So deep spots in rivers tend to maintain consistent temperatures.
Okay, so it's deeper, but it has less volume.
The canal has been excavated deeper than the level of the river used to be, so that the canal can shed floodwaters, where a river would flood in floodwaters. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's just a capacity question. In terms of capacity, we've excavated the bottom out so that it'll hold a bigger volume when the water dumps. Separate from that, there's the average water level. In a canal, because it's one smooth bottom, the average water volume in a canal, unless it's dumping a flood, like flushing a toilet, unless it's just like letting the flood go through, canals tend to have a little scrim of water, if any. Whereas rivers, aside from floodwater, they have shallow and deep pockets, and that diversity of water volumes maintains temperature. That make sense?